All right, good morning, AC2 students. Today's going to be day 2 of your Vietnam notes. We're going to go through it as quickly as we can as far as for the rest of this week and next week. May have to take out a few things here and there, maybe rearrange some things a little bit just to make sure we get this all done and taken care of in time for the end of the year for you guys so you guys can get your test and all that good stuff. So if you want to pause me for a second and go to slide 12 on your PowerPoint, you guys can do so. Now, what this is, remember yesterday we talked all about getting into the war, pre-U.S. major involvement in the war. Well, remember with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, we're now in, all right? So we're fighting in the war, we're fighting in the battle. Now, this is just a statement by one of the troops. This is actually in a book, but it was from a real-life soldier and what it was like there. So read along with me as I read it. It says, "We moved through the boiling heat with 60 pounds of weapons and gear, causing a typical Marine to drop 20% of his body weight." Now, Marines aren't exactly the heaviest people anyway. Usually very lean, very muscular. So 20% of your body weight, that's going to be a lot of weight for them to lose. Okay, when we stopped, we dug chest-deep fighting holes and slit trenches for toilets. We slept on the ground under makeshift tents. We would sleep for only an hour or two at a stretch. We had nighttime ambushes, listening posts, foxhole duty, and radio watches. Ringworm, malaria, and dysentery were common, as was trench foot. All right, and if you don't know what trench foot is, think about like how your feet get like super pruny whenever they get wet, like when you're in the pool for a long time. So, but your foot is in that water for hours upon hours, and it gets severely, severely infected. All right, so that's just a quick, a quick description of what a typical day was like for a Marine in Vietnam. All right, so next slide down, slide 13. It says soldiers found the war confusing, and they did. They're fighting for the South Vietnamese, right? We're fighting for their freedom. We're defending the people of South Vietnam. Yet they were indifferent to us. They weren't really socializing with us or any of those sorts of things. And we were kind of like, well, what the heck? We're here. We're fighting for you. We're trying to make sure you're okay. We're trying to make sure we're keeping you safe. And you guys really aren't helping us out any. You guys really aren't, being appreciative, if you will. But now remember what we talked about yesterday with the Viet Cong. Well, there's a reason for that, right? If the Viet Cong sees South Vietnamese socializing or helping U.S. troops, well, now all of a sudden, now their lives are in danger. The South Vietnamese citizens are. So, yeah, that's why they weren't really openly appreciative of us or wouldn't talk to us that much, because if the Viet Cong saw that, they're likely to get killed, the South Vietnamese citizens, okay? Another issue and why it was confusing and so hard for U.S. troops, we didn't know who the Viet Cong was or wasn't. All right, remember I said they would dress like civilians. All right, and some of them would be very, very young. I think it was a kid trying to sell you fruit or something in a stand. Next thing you know, they're shooting you, throwing a grenade at you, whatever it is. And once again, were there ever times where United States people killed innocent civilians thinking they were Viet Cong? Probably. All right, and this was a big reason why. All right, so next slide, the ground war. The Viet Cong used guerrilla warfare tactics. Sneak attacks and sabotage. And remember, like I said yesterday, they would hide in elaborate underground tunnels. They would hide in the jungle. And they would also hide in plain sight because they were dressed like regular civilians. So once again, we did not know if we would see someone walking up to us on the street saying, "Hey, I want to sell you produce. I want to sell you an orange." We weren't 100% sure if they were a citizen or Viet Cong looking to ambush us. And that made it very, very unnerving, I'm sure, for the troops. Okay, so like it says, American soldiers at times would kill civilians thinking they were Viet Cong. Okay, next slide where it says the air war. Different types of bombs we would drop. Number one was they were known as saturation bombings. And what these would be large concentrations of bombs over certain areas. So these planes would fly over, open up a hatch, and dozens of these small bombs would fall out of them. Okay, so that was a saturation bombing. A fragmentation bombing is whenever the bomb would explode, huge pieces of shrapnel would go everywhere. They look at a fragmentation bomb kind of like you would as a giant hand grenade, right? So how does a hand grenade do its damage? Well, obviously it explodes, but once it explodes, how does it do its damage? It's the shrapnel, the pieces of metal. Um, fragmentation bomb is essentially just a giant one of those, to where they can cause severe, severe damage. Losing limbs would be an obvious problem with fragmentation bombs, as with many dead bodies as well. One thing that Vietnam did is it brought us into a time of chemical warfare, if you will. And number one is Agent Orange. And what Agent Orange is a chemical weapon used to kill vegetation and expose enemy hiding places. So what it was, remember I said the Viet Cong would hide in the jungles, right? The jungles were very, very thick as far as the vegetation would go. So we couldn't see in them on flyovers, right? So what the United States would do is they would spray it with Agent Orange, which is just a chemical called Agent Orange because whenever it would come out of the planes, it looked orange, right? And it would kill off the vegetation. But what it would also do is cause severe, severe problems to people that would ingest it, either through inhaling it or if it got on food and you ate it that way. I have a story about a guy I know that was in Vietnam, and he suffered some effects of Agent Orange, which it's too long of a story right now, so I'm not going to get into it. But next time I do see you guys, if you guys want to hear that story, I'll be happy to tell you. Other chemical that was used, napalm. Napalm is a highly flammable chemical dropped from U.S. planes during firebombing attacks. Let me break down for you what napalm essentially is. Whenever you were a kid, and there would be like wet tar somewhere, like on a sidewalk, pavement, or whatever, did you ever play in it? Not only the main thing, it probably really made your parents angry, but tell me what it was like playing with tar, right? It's very, very sticky. All right, it's hard to like scrape off or get off, right? It's very, very sticky. Napalm is essentially tar at like 40,000 degrees. All right, so imagine that tar getting on your skin, and it's quickly, almost immediately going to burn through every layer of your skin, your tendons, your muscles, everything. And you can't just, get it off you, right? Because it's stuck, because it's like tar. And this was a devastating, devastating weapon that we used. We used it against the Viet Cong. We used it against the North Vietnamese. But unfortunately, sometimes when we would drop it out of canisters on planes, it would sometimes go behind enemy lines or behind our lines, I should say. And there was a scene that it's based on a true story. There's a movie starring Mel Gibson called We Were Soldiers. And that happened. And it's in the movie, but it really did happen, where one of the planes accidentally dropped a canister of napalm on American troops. And the movie does a great, great job of showing you the effects of napalm. Now, if you want to go down with me here, I got about a dozen pictures, and then we'll finish up for today. But these are just some pictures that I found over the years. So once again, if you're just watching this on YouTube, you're not going to be able to see the pictures, but hopefully you guys have your PowerPoints up so you can go along with me. Picture number 1, which is slide 16, that is simply just a U.S. soldier on patrol, and you see the heavy, heavy amounts of ammunition they have. And they're looking for North Vietnamese, they're looking for VC, Viet Cong, whatever it may be. And that's just one soldier there, because you can see that gun's not very mobile, right? It's not like you can just pick it up, run with it, and start firing at the enemies. So that gun is probably one along of 3 or 4 that are positioned next to him. Next one down, slide 17, that is a Huey helicopter. Those were the helicopters that were used during Vietnam for essentially transportation, pickup, drop-offs for troops. They did have gunners on them to protect, but these weren't exactly like military-style helicopters where they would get involved in air battles or anything like that. These were essentially transportation helicopters. They were called Huey helicopters. They would drop off troops. They would also pick up troops, in particular wounded troops, trying to get them out of battlefield. Slide 18, you see a group of soldiers walking along like a little river or a stream. Once again, you never know what's in it. It's not exactly like that's clean water, right? So there's dead carcasses in there. Not necessarily humans, but animals, tons of snakes, all sorts of stuff. Where you saw earlier today when we talked about malaria, dysentery, this is where you would get a lot of these diseases, right? Not only from the water, but there would be mosquitoes and all sorts of things around there. So not exactly the greatest patrolling conditions if you were a troop. Slide 19, that's just a group of U.S. soldiers smiling for the camera. Now, slide 20 here gets a little, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, but this is a little bit out of place as far as where it was supposed to be. But that is some effects of Agent Orange. And you can see the devastating effects it has on that woman. And it doesn't happen immediately. It wasn't like she breathed it in or like it got on a piece of fruit or a vegetable and she ate it and then boom, the next day she looked like that. That was just a long, long, long length of time. Some devastating injuries, or I guess I don't know. I don't even know how you would describe it, but the effects that the Agent Orange caused her. Take a look now at slide 21. Hard picture to look at, but as you can see, you see a person literally shooting someone in the head. Well, let me break this down for you. The person with his hands tied behind his back that's getting shot, that is a South Vietnamese citizen. So he is a citizen of the country we're defending, right? But he was a communist sympathizer. He sympathized with the North, felt he was a communist. And you see what happens if you're a communist in South Vietnam. He was executed right on the street. Now keep that in mind. We don't like the communism or the communists. We're fighting against them. We're fighting to stop it. But, you know, if someone in the United States said they were a communist, we might not like them. You know, we might not like their views, but this isn't going to happen. But this is what happens. So when you see the picture like that, you distinctively think, well, that's evil. That's a terrible thing. They're shooting that man for his views. Keep in mind, that's the country we're helping. That's the country we're fighting for, the one with the gun in his hand. So in times of war, in times of conflict like this, you know, very rarely is each side perfectly good, right? Each side has some issues with it, and obviously that's one there. Slide 22, those are wounded U.S. soldiers being transported out of a battlefield. Now, slide 23, this won a Pulitzer Prize picture in the late 60s, early 70s. That is a village after the United States dropped napalm on it. And you see the children running out of the village, screaming, crying, and then obviously you see the little girl who's undressed running and screaming as well. She is not simply just like, oh, she happened to be undressed at the time. Her clothes and a lot of other things were burnt off of her body. And you're going to see that here in a couple more slides. So if you look at slide 24, that's a napalm explosion over a village. So you see it's just giant fireballs. But once again, keep in mind, it's like tar. It's like all that flames going up in the air. It's burning tar at like 30, 40, 50,000 degrees. Slide 25, that is, remember when I told you how the United States accidentally dropped napalm on our own troops? And once again, it wasn't on purpose, it was an accident. That was at a battle called the Ladrang Valley, and that's a picture of it from there. That's the napalm attacks. And like I said, one of those canisters of napalm actually went behind enemy lines and ends up killing one of the U.S. soldiers. Can't remember his name. He just had a baby 2 days prior. To the other soldiers, he was talking about how his wife let him know that their baby was born, their baby was healthy just a day or two before that. And he was one of the soldiers that took the brunt of the napalm, and he ends up, if you see the scene in We Were Soldiers, it's very, very graphic, but it's also very, very accurate, just how bad his injuries were. And unfortunately, he ends up dying a few days after the attack. The next slide, slide 26, that little girl that was running out of the village, that was her years later as an adult holding her baby. And if you look at her back, you can still see years and years later the devastating effects of what the napalm did to her. You see her back, not trying to be crass or funny when I say this, but like if you've ever seen like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, like with Freddy Krueger's skin, how it's severely, severely burned, severely, severely scarred. That's what her skin looks like. And it covers like about 80% of her body there. So once again, these are not necessarily scars that simply just heal over time. Slide 27, that's another girl that was hit with napalm, just to give you an idea of the devastating effects of it. Same thing with slide 28. And then if you look at slide 29 and 30, just the disfigurements of these people, those are after effects of Agent Orange. And you see like in slide 29 what it does to that young woman's face over time. And then slide 30, you see the disfiguration of the boy's spine, and then the boy on the right, the young man on the right, that is his face. And if you look close, you can see his mouth, you can see his nose, those sorts of things. But very, very hard to look at pictures and devastating effects that both napalm and Agent Orange did to people that came in contact with it. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, I know I went through it very quickly. Hope you guys got a good understanding of what it was about and what we were going over. If you have any questions on any of that, though, please shoot me a message on Teams. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. We're going to go and continue right back into this tomorrow. All right, guys, have a good day. See you tomorrow. Bye.